My phone wouldn't stop buzzing. 18 missed calls from Donald. The stock price was in free fall, down 20% in an hour. 400,000 customers locked out of their accounts. And somewhere in my kitchen, drinking coffee while my daughter watched cartoons. I had to decide whether to let the whole thing burn or save the people who didn't listen to me 8 days ago. But I'm getting ahead of myself. My name's Adam Rouso, and until that Tuesday afternoon, I was the senior infrastructure architect at Pinnacle Financial Technologies. That's a fancy way of saying I was the guy who made sure money moved where it was supposed to, when it was supposed to, for about 400,000 active traders and 300 institutional clients. I'd been there 11 years. I knew every server, every database cluster, every quirky workaround in our legacy systems that kept the whole operation from imploding. I wasn't management. I wasn't the guy in the corner office with the view. I was the guy they called at 2 in the morning when the overnight batch processing started throwing errors. I was the guy who'd missed my daughter Sophie's 5th birthday party because a storage array decided to fail during market hours. My wife Claire had stopped being surprised when I'd sneak out of bed to check system alerts on my phone. The thing about infrastructure work is that when you do it right, nobody notices you exist. The applications team gets credit for new features. The business development guys get bonuses for landing clients. But the pipes that actually move all that data, the architecture that has to scale during market volatility, that's invisible until it breaks. And that's exactly what Stanford Kellerman was counting on. Stanford joined Pinnacle 6 months before everything went sideways. He came from one of those Silicon Valley unicorns that burned through venture capital like it was kindling. His LinkedIn profile had all the right buzzwords. Digital transformation leader, agile champion, cloud-first evangelist. The board loved him. Our CEO, Donald Vickers, introduced Stanford as the VP of Technology Modernization at an all-hands meeting, talking about how we needed to evolve or die in the fintech space. I'd heard it all before. Every few years, some new executive would show up, convinced that our problems could be solved by whatever technology was trending on Hacker News that week. Usually, they'd last about 18 months before quietly moving on to their next gig, leaving us to clean up their half-finished initiatives. But Stanford was different. He didn't just want to add new technology. He wanted to rip out the foundation and rebuild it, and he wanted to do it fast. Our first real meeting was in Conference Room B, about 2 weeks after he'd started. He'd called together everyone from the IT infrastructure team, which at that point was me, 2 senior engineers named Kyle and Vanessa, and 4 junior developers who mostly handled routine maintenance. Stanford walked in 15 minutes late, holding one of those green smoothies that cost $12 and taste like lawn clippings. He didn't apologize. He just pulled up a presentation on the screen and launched into it. All right, team, let's talk about why we're still running like it's 2008. He clicked to a slide that showed our current architecture, which somebody from his team had apparently diagrammed. It wasn't even accurate, but I kept my mouth shut. We've got on-premise servers, we've got monolithic databases, we've got custom code that probably nobody even understands anymore. This isn't sustainable. Kyle glanced at me. I kept my expression neutral. So here's the plan, Stanford continued. Full cloud migration. We're going to containerize everything, move to microservices, and get off this legacy infrastructure. Timeline is aggressive, 6 months. I know that sounds tight, but I've done this before. It's not as complicated as people think. That's when I spoke up. Stanford, can I ask what you're basing that timeline on? He looked at me like I'd just asked him to explain why water is wet. Industry best practices. My previous company did a similar migration in 4 months. What was their transaction volume? What's that got to do with anything? Stanford's smoothie was leaving a ring on the conference table. Nobody wanted to tell him to use a coaster. Well, we process about 800,000 transactions on an average day, I said. During volatility, that can spike to 2 million. Our uptime requirement is 99.97%, which gives us about 15 minutes of acceptable downtime per month. And we're regulated by the SEC and FinCEN, which means any architectural changes need to go through compliance review. I'm just trying to understand how we're going to migrate everything, test it thoroughly, get regulatory approval, and maintain that uptime in 6 months. Vanessa nodded. Kyle was staring at his laptop, probably wishing he was anywhere else. Stanford smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. That's exactly the kind of thinking we need to move past. You're focused on limitations instead of solutions. At my last company, we had a saying, "Done is better than perfect." We're going to move fast and iterate. We're not a social media app, I said. If our system goes down during trading hours, real people lose real money. We've got pension funds, retirement accounts, people's actual futures running through our infrastructure. I appreciate your caution, Adam. That's why you're good at what you do. He said it like he was complimenting a child for tying their shoes. But we've got competitive pressure. Our rivals are already cloud native. We're losing potential clients because our technology stack looks like a museum. Donald has made it clear that this migration is a priority, and I'm here to make it happen. The meeting went downhill from there. Stanford had already made up his mind. He'd probably written the whole plan before he even joined the company. Our job wasn't to advise him. It was to execute his vision, and if we had concerns, well, that just meant we were resistant to change. Over the next few months, Stanford brought in a team of contractors from a consulting firm that specialized in cloud migrations. They were sharp kids, most of them fresh out of college, full of enthusiasm and theoretical knowledge. They'd passed their cloud certification exams and built some impressive demo projects. What they hadn't done was manage a production financial system where 5 minutes of downtime could trigger regulatory investigations. I tried to work with them. I really did. I documented our architecture, explained the dependencies, walked them through the disaster recovery procedures we'd spent years refining. But Stanford kept pushing for speed. Every status meeting, he'd ask why things were taking so long. He'd question why we couldn't just lift and shift everything to the cloud over a weekend. At home, Claire could tell something was eating at me. She'd find me at the kitchen table at midnight, laptop open, going through migration plans and looking for potential failure points. "They're not listening," I told her one night. Sophie was asleep upstairs, and the house had that particular quiet that only happens after a 7-year-old finally runs out of energy. Stanford's treating this like we're just moving files to Dropbox. He doesn't understand that our trading engine has dependencies on data feeds that have timing requirements down to the millisecond. Claire worked in marketing for a healthcare company, so she got corporate dysfunction. "Have you talked to Donald?" Stanford's his golden boy. Donald's convinced this migration is going to boost the stock price. There's already been articles in the trades about our bold modernization initiative. "So what are you going to do?" That was the question, wasn't it? I'd spent 11 years at Pinnacle. I'd built relationships. I'd built systems I was genuinely proud of. But I was also watching a train heading toward a cliff, and the conductor was telling me not to worry about it. "I don't know," I said. The breaking point came on a Tuesday. Stanford had scheduled what he called a technical review session, which was really just him presenting his final migration plan to Donald and the board. He'd asked me to attend to answer any technical questions. I should have known it was a setup. The boardroom was one of those deliberately intimidating spaces with a table that could seat 20 and windows overlooking downtown. Donald was there, along with 3 board members, our CFO Linda Brennan, and the head of compliance, a meticulous guy named Robert Chang who'd saved our necks during the last SEC audit. Stanford went through his presentation like he was announcing the iPhone. Lots of graphics showing our legacy limitations versus the cloud-enabled future. He threw around metrics about cost savings and scalability and speed to market. It was a good presentation, if you didn't know anything about how financial infrastructure actually worked. Then he got to the timeline. "We're going live with Phase 1 in 3 weeks. That'll move our customer-facing web applications and mobile APIs to the cloud. Phase 2, 6 weeks after that, brings over the trading engine and core transaction processing. Phase 3 handles data warehousing and analytics. Full migration complete in 4 months. Robert, bless him, raised his hand. "What about the compliance review? Any architectural changes to the trading engine require us to file updated system documentation with the SEC. That process alone typically takes 8 to 12 weeks. Stanford didn't miss a beat. "We're going to file for that in parallel. The cloud infrastructure actually makes us more compliant, not less. Better audit trails, better security, better disaster recovery." "But we can't go live until we get approval," Robert said. "We'll get approval. I've got relationships with some of the regional SEC staff from my previous work. This is standard stuff. I watched Robert's jaw tighten, but he didn't push it. You learned pretty quickly in corporate America when a battle was already lost. Donald looked at me. Adam, you've been quiet. You're the infrastructure expert. What do you think? This was my moment. I could play it safe, voice some mild concerns, and let this play out, or I could tell the truth. I think the timeline is unrealistic, and the approach is dangerous, I said. Our trading engine isn't just some application we can containerize and move to the cloud. It's got real-time data feeds from 6 different exchanges, each with their own latency requirements. It's got integration points with our banking partners for settlement. It's got regulatory reporting that runs on precise schedules. I'm not saying we can't eventually migrate to the cloud, but doing it in 6 weeks without thorough testing is asking for a catastrophic failure. The room got very quiet. Linda, the CFO, looked uncomfortable. The board members were unreadable. Stanford leaned back in his chair. With respect, Adam, you're describing problems that we've already solved in the architecture design. Yes, there's complexity, but that's why we've brought in specialists. I understand you've been running these systems for a long time, and change is uncomfortable, but we can't let fear hold us back. It's not fear, I said. It's experience. Last year we had a minor database configuration change that seemed routine. It caused a cascading failure that took down trading for 45 minutes. We had regulatory fines, we had angry clients, we had manual reconciliation that took 3 days. And that was from changing a timeout parameter. You're talking about rearchitecting the entire foundation. And how long did it take you to fix that failure? Stanford asked. 45 minutes. Exactly, because you knew the systems. Well, now we're going to have multiple engineers who know the systems with better documentation and better tooling. We're reducing key person risk. He said it like he was doing me a favor. Donald stepped in. I appreciate both perspectives. Adam, your caution has served us well over the years, but Stanford's right that we need to evolve. Our competitors are eating our lunch on technology. I've got board members asking why we can't launch features as fast as the startups. Because we're not a startup, I said. We're a regulated financial institution with 400,000 customers who trust us with their money. Fast and broken isn't better than slow and reliable. One of the board members, a venture capital guy named Gregory who joined 6 months ago, spoke up. In my experience, the people most resistant to change are the ones most invested in the old ways of doing things. No offense, Adam, but maybe you're too close to this. And there it was. I'd gone from being the expert to being the obstacle. Stanford was smiling like he'd just won a poker hand. Donald wrapped up the meeting. Stanford, let's move forward with the plan. Adam, I'm going to need you to support this initiative. I know it's aggressive, but we've got to take some calculated risks to stay competitive. Calculated risks, that's what we were calling recklessness now. The next 2 weeks were a nightmare. Stanford's contractor team started making changes to production systems without going through proper change management. Kyle came to me one afternoon, looking panicked, because somebody had modified database replication settings without documenting what they'd changed or why. I escalated to Stanford. He told me to stop micromanaging and trust the process. Vanessa found errors in the containerized version of our trading engine during testing. The latency was inconsistent, sometimes spiking to 300 milliseconds when it needed to be under 50. She documented it, filed a bug report, and got told that they'd optimize in production. I couldn't sleep. I'd lie awake running through failure scenarios in my head. Claire found me at 3 in the morning, sitting in our home office, staring at monitoring dashboards on my laptop. This isn't sustainable, she said. You're going to have a heart attack before you're 40. If I don't catch these problems, the whole system's going to collapse. Then let it collapse, she said it gently but firmly. Adam, you've warned them, you've documented the risks, you can't save people from their own decisions, and you've got a family that actually needs you alive and sane. She was right, I knew she was right, but walking away felt like abandoning my post. The final confrontation happened 3 days before Phase 1 was supposed to go live. I'd found a critical flaw in the cloud security configuration. The way Stanford's team had set things up, our customer data would have been accessible to anyone who knew the right API endpoints. No authentication, no encryption. It was the kind of vulnerability that would make us the lead story on every tech news site and probably result in criminal charges. I went straight to Stanford's office. He was on a call, but I didn't care. I waited until he hung up. "We've got a security problem," I said, and showed him what I'd found. He glanced at my laptop screen for maybe 10 seconds. "That's just the development environment. Obviously, we'll lock that down before production." "It's configured exactly the same way as production," I checked. "Then we'll fix it this week, add it to the punch list." "Stanford, this isn't a punch list item. This is a complete exposure of customer financial data. We need to halt the migration until we've done a full security audit." He stood up. He was taller than me, and he used it. "Adam, I've been patient with you. I understand you're used to being the guy with all the answers, but you need to accept that your role has changed. You're not the architect anymore. You're an implementation engineer. Your job is to execute the plan, not question it. My job is to keep the systems running and the customer data safe. Your job is what I tell you it is." His voice had gone cold. "You're a senior engineer. You report to me. And I'm telling you that we're going live on Friday, and you're either going to support that or you're going to have a problem." "What kind of problem?" "The kind where I have to question whether you're the right fit for this team going forward." We stared at each other. This was it. This was the moment where I either back down or burn the bridge. "You know what the difference is between managing code and managing infrastructure?" I asked. "Enlighten me." "When code breaks, you roll back and deploy a fix. When infrastructure breaks, people lose money, real money. And in a financial system, that means lawsuits, regulatory investigations, and prison time for the executives who ignored the warnings." He scoffed. "You just manage code, not people." I didn't debate him. I reached into my pocket, pulled out my badge and my keycard, and set them on his desk. "Then good luck managing the servers without me." His expression shifted from anger to something like shock. He hadn't actually expected me to quit. "You're seriously walking out 3 days before a major launch. You said I wasn't necessary. You've got specialists. You've got contractors who know better than me, so you'll be fine." I was surprised by how calm I felt. Maybe it was relief. "I'll email my resignation to HR. I'm happy to do a knowledge transfer, but based on your previous comments about my role, I'm guessing you won't need that." I walked out. I didn't say goodbye to the team. I didn't clean out my desk. I just got in my car and drove home at 2 in the afternoon on a Tuesday. Claire was surprised to see me. Sophie was at school. I told her what happened. "How do you feel?" she asked. "Terrified, relieved, angry, all of it." "Good, that means you're human." She hugged me. "We'll figure it out. You'll find another job, a better job with people who actually listen to you." That night I slept for 10 hours straight. No alerts, no monitoring dashboards, no panic attacks about database replication lag. The next morning, Kyle called me. "Man, what happened? Stanford sent out this email saying you'd decided to pursue other opportunities and that he'd be personally overseeing the infrastructure team during the transition." "I quit." "Yeah, I figured. Listen, it's chaos here. Stanford's trying to act like everything's fine, but nobody knows half the stuff you handled. We found 3 critical batch jobs that are failing, and we don't even know what they do. Check the documentation wiki. I kept everything updated." Stanford's team deleted the wiki, said it was legacy documentation that would confuse people. I actually laughed. It was either that or scream. "Kyle, I can't help you. I don't work there anymore, but if I were you, I'd be updating my resume." Yeah, I think you're right." I spent the next few days being a present father and husband for the first time in months. I took Sophie to school. I made dinner. I didn't check my phone every 5 minutes. I applied to a few positions, but I wasn't in a hurry. We had savings, we'd be okay. And then 8 days after I'd quit, my phone started blowing up. It was a Saturday morning. Sophie was watching cartoons. Claire and I were having coffee in the kitchen. My phone buzzed with a text from Vanessa. "Systems down, everything. Trading engine, customer portal, mobile app, all of it." Then Kyle, "Dude, it's a disaster. Stanford's freaking out." Then a number I didn't recognize. "Adam, it's Robert from compliance. I know you don't work here anymore, but if you've got any insights on what might cause a total system failure, Donald wants to talk to you." I opened my laptop and pulled up Pinnacle's stock price. It had opened at $42. In the past hour, it had dropped to 33 and was still falling. Claire looked over my shoulder. Is that? Yeah, that's them. My phone rang. It was Donald. I let it go to voicemail. He called again and again. Finally, I answered. This is Adam. Adam, thank God. Listen, I know you left on bad terms, but we've got a crisis here. The entire system went down at market open. We've got 400,000 customers locked out. We've got institutional clients threatening lawsuits. The stock's in free fall. I need you to come back and help us fix this. What happened? I don't know. Stanford says it's a cloud provider issue, but their status page says everything's operational. We've got contractors running around like chickens with their heads cut off. Nobody knows what broke or how to fix it. Where's Stanford? There was a pause. He's consulting with the team. That meant he was hiding in his office, trying to avoid responsibility. Donald, when I quit, I warned you this would happen. I documented the risks. I told you the timeline was dangerous. You chose to listen to Stanford instead. I know you were right. I'm sorry. But right now I need your help. Name your price. I looked at Claire. She was watching me, Sophie's laughter from the living room mixing with the tension in our kitchen. This was the moment. I could walk away, let them figure it out themselves. Or I could help the people I'd worked with for 11 years, even if their leadership didn't deserve it. I'll come in as a consultant. $200 an hour, minimum 4-hour blocks. But I'm not doing this to save Stanford's project. I'm doing this to protect customer data and help the people on my old team. And I want complete autonomy. No interference from Stanford or anyone else. Done. When can you get here? Give me an hour. Claire squeezed my hand. You're a good person, too good maybe. Yeah, well, Kyle and Vanessa don't deserve to have their careers destroyed because Stanford's an idiot. I drove to the office. The parking lot was half empty because it was Saturday, but I could see lights on in the IT department. I used my personal phone to call Kyle, who let me in through the side entrance since my badge didn't work anymore. The office looked like a war room. Contractors were clustered around monitors, their faces pale. Vanessa was on the phone with someone, her voice tight with stress. Kyle looked like he hadn't slept. Stanford was there, looking significantly less confident than usual. When he saw me, his expression went through several emotions: surprise, embarrassment, anger, and finally resignation. Adam, Donald said he was bringing you in. Where are we at? He started to say something about cloud architecture and microservices, but I cut him off. I need specifics. What failed? When? What error messages are you seeing? Vanessa pulled up the logs. It started at 9:30 a.m., right at market open. The trading engine stopped processing orders. Then the database cluster lost connection. Then the customer portal started timing out. We tried to roll back, but the rollback failed. Now nothing's responding. I sat down at a terminal and started digging through the system logs. The error messages were cascading, each one triggering 3 more. It was like watching dominoes fall in slow motion, except each domino represented millions of dollars in transactions. It didn't take long to find the problem. Stanford's team had migrated the trading engine to the cloud, but they'd kept the real-time data feeds on the old on-premise servers. When market volume spiked at opening, which happened every single Saturday morning when Asian markets were active, the latency between the cloud and the on-premise systems caused a timeout cascade. The trading engine started queuing transactions, which overwhelmed the database, which triggered an automatic failover to the backup database, except the backup database wasn't properly configured in the new architecture. So the failover failed, and the whole thing collapsed. It was exactly the scenario I'd warned about, the one I'd documented, the one Stanford had dismissed as fear-based thinking. We need to fail back to the old architecture, I said. Stanford shook his head. We decommissioned the old servers, that's why the rollback failed. I stared at him. You decommissioned production servers before confirming the new system was stable. The migration plan called for immediate decommissioning to prevent configuration drift. That's not a migration plan, that's arson. I turned to Kyle and Vanessa. Do we have backups of the old system configuration? Yeah, Kyle said, on the backup tape system. Which is also decommissioned, Stanford added quietly. I took a deep breath. Losing my temper wouldn't help. If you've ever been in a situation where everyone's looking at you to fix something that shouldn't have broken in the first place, you know that feeling. It's why people watch the corporate vault. because this stuff happens every day in companies that look perfect from the outside. Anyway, if you're finding this whole mess interesting, I'd appreciate you joining the journey to 1,000 subscribers. But right now, I had a crisis to manage. Okay, we're going to have to rebuild from scratch. Vanessa, I need you to spin up new database instances using the cloud provider's fastest provisioning. Kyle, start documenting every customer transaction that was in flight when the system went down. We're going to have to manually reconcile those. How many transactions are we talking about? Kyle asked. Probably around 50,000, based on typical Saturday morning volume. His face went white. That's going to take days. Then you'd better get started. Stanford, I looked at him. You're going to call Donald and tell him we need to issue a public statement that trading is halted for emergency maintenance and customer funds are secure. We need to stop the panic selling. He nodded and left the room. For a guy who'd been so confident 2 weeks ago, he looked completely lost. I pulled up the cloud provider's console and started working. The problem with rebuilding infrastructure in the middle of a crisis is that you can't take shortcuts, but you also can't afford to be slow. Every minute the system was down, we were losing customer trust and watching the stock price drop. 2 hours in, I hit a wall. The database backups were corrupted. Not all of them, but enough that I couldn't guarantee data integrity if I restored from them. Vanessa, we've got a problem, I called out. The automated backups are corrupted. Please tell me you've got manual backups somewhere. She came over, looked at the screen, and her expression told me everything I needed to know. The manual backup process was one of the things Stanford's team eliminated. They said the automated cloud backups were more reliable. I felt my chest tighten. This wasn't just a system failure anymore. This was potential data loss. Customer account information, transaction history, tax records, all of it possibly gone. Stanford came back into the room. Donald wants an ETA on when we'll be back online. Tell Donald we might have a bigger problem than downtime. We might have data loss. The color drained from his face. What? Your team eliminated the manual backup process. The automated backups are corrupted. So unless we can find another copy of the data somewhere, we've potentially lost customer information. That's not possible. The cloud provider guarantees data durability. They guarantee that their storage won't fail. They don't guarantee that the data you give them is good. Garbage in, garbage out. I was going through file systems looking for anything that might help. When did your team decommission the old database servers? Thursday night. So they might still be in the decommission queue. Kyle, call the data center. Tell them not to wipe any servers that were marked for decommissioning this week. We need to check if the old data is still on those drives. Kyle got on the phone. The contractors were watching me like I was performing surgery, which I guess I was. Except instead of a patient, it was a multi-billion-dollar company bleeding out in real time. 20 minutes later, Kyle came back. Good news. The data center hasn't wiped the drives yet. They're pulling the servers out of the decommission queue now. I felt a wave of relief so strong I had to sit down for a second. Okay, we can work with this. We're going to bring those old servers back online in read-only mode, extract the data, and rebuild the production database from scratch. How long will that take? Stanford asked. If everything goes perfectly, 10 hours, more realistically, 14 to 16. Donald's not going to like that. Donald can take a number, I said. We're already in full crisis mode. The stock's already tanking. What matters now is getting this right, not getting it fast. We do this wrong, and instead of 1 day of downtime, we're looking at weeks of recovery and potential criminal liability for data loss. Stanford didn't argue. Maybe he was finally understanding the difference between managing a social media app and managing a financial system. The next 12 hours were brutal. I walked Kyle and Vanessa through rebuilding the core infrastructure while I handled the database recovery. The old servers came back online, and I started extracting data, verifying checksums, making sure we weren't importing corrupted records. Around hour 6, I found another problem. The transaction logs from the new cloud system didn't match the old on-premise system. There was a 3-minute window where transactions had been recorded in the cloud, but not in the old database. That meant we had 53 transactions in limbo, executed by customers, but not properly recorded in our system of record. I called Vanessa over. We need to manually reconstruct these transactions. Can you pull the application logs from the web servers? They're in the cloud, which is currently down. Of course they are. I rubbed my eyes. It was past midnight now. I'd been at this for 14 hours straight. What about the customer service call records? If people executed these transactions, some of them probably called to confirm. That system's separate. Different vendor should still be accessible. We spent the next 2 hours cross-referencing customer service calls with transaction timestamps, manually rebuilding what had happened during that 3-minute window. It was tedious, careful work, but it had to be done. Every transaction represented real money, real people's savings. At one point, Stanford came back with coffee. He set a cup down next to me without saying anything. It was the first human gesture I'd seen from him. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "You were right about all of it." I took a sip of the coffee. It was terrible, but I needed the caffeine. Yeah, I was. I thought I knew better. I've done migrations before, and they worked. I didn't understand that this was different. "The problem wasn't that you didn't understand," I said. "The problem was that you didn't listen when people told you what you didn't understand. Kyle, Vanessa, me, we all tried to warn you. You dismissed us because we didn't fit your narrative." He nodded. "What happens now?" "Now we finish fixing this. Then you're probably going to get fired. Then the company's going to spend months rebuilding trust with customers and regulators, and hopefully whoever replaces you actually has a technical background." We got the system back online Sunday morning at 6:15 a.m. Not the cloud version. A hybrid version, using the old servers that we'd rescued from decommissioning and pieces of the new cloud infrastructure that actually worked. It wasn't pretty, but it was stable. I ran tests for another 2 hours, verifying that transactions were processing correctly, that customer accounts showed the right balances, that the regulatory reporting was functioning. Everything checked out. At 8 a.m., I sent an email to Donald. "System restored, all customer data verified, zero data loss, recommend full external audit before attempting any further migrations." He called me immediately. "Adam, I can't thank you enough, you saved us." "I didn't save you. I cleaned up a mess that shouldn't have happened in the first place." "Fair enough. Can you come in Monday morning? We need to talk about next steps." "I'll be there." I drove home exhausted. Claire and Sophie were at the farmer's market. I showered, fell into bed, and slept for 12 hours straight. Monday morning, the boardroom was full. Donald, Linda the CFO, Robert from compliance, all 3 board members including Gregory and Stanford, who looked like he'd aged 10 years over the weekend. Donald started the meeting. "First, I want to thank Adam again for coming back and preventing this from being catastrophic. Second, I want to understand how this happened so we can make sure it never happens again." I walked them through it, the rushed timeline, the ignored warnings, the decommissioned backups, the security vulnerabilities that we were lucky didn't get exploited during the downtime, the 53 transactions we'd had to manually reconstruct, the fact that we'd been about 4 hours away from permanent data loss when we recovered those old servers. Robert from compliance was taking notes. "I'll need to file an incident report with the SEC. They're going to want to know our remediation plan." "What's our exposure?" Donald asked Linda. "Legally, we're looking at probably 20 to 30 million in settlements, assuming the lawsuits don't go to trial. Regulatory fines, hard to say. Could be anywhere from 5 to 50 million depending on how the SEC views our risk management practices. Stock price has partially recovered, but we're still down 15% from Friday's close. And we've had about 8,000 customers submit account closure requests since Saturday." The room was quiet. 8,000 customers was about 2% of our base, which might not sound like much, but in the financial services industry, trust is everything. Once customers leave, they don't usually come back. Gregory, the board member who'd called me resistant to change, spoke up. "What do we need to do to fix this?" "Medium term, we need a realistic modernization plan," I said. "Not 6 months, probably 2 to 3 years with proper testing and compliance review at each phase. We need to rebuild the backup systems that got eliminated. We need to hire people who have actual production infrastructure experience, not just certifications. And we need to establish a technical review board that has veto power over changes that could impact system stability." "Long term?" Donald asked. Long-term, you need to decide whether you're serious about technology or whether it's just a buzzword to impress investors. Because what happened this weekend was the predictable result of treating infrastructure like it's disposable. Stanford's not the first executive who's come in here wanting to move fast and break things. But in a financial system, breaking things means breaking people's lives. Stanford spoke for the first time. This was my failure. I pushed too hard, too fast. I didn't listen to the people who knew the systems. I thought I knew better. He looked at me. Adam tried to warn me multiple times. I dismissed him. That's on me. Donald nodded slowly. Stanford, I appreciate you taking responsibility, but I think we need a change in leadership for the technology organization. I'm going to ask for your resignation, effective today. We'll provide a severance package, and we'll keep this as amicable as possible. Stanford didn't fight it. He just nodded, stood up, and walked out. I almost felt bad for him. He wasn't a bad person, just someone who'd been promoted into a role he wasn't ready for and didn't have the humility to admit it. Donald turned to me. Adam, I'd like you to come back full-time, lead the infrastructure team. VP-level position, significant raise, and real authority over technical decisions. No more getting overruled by people who don't understand the systems. It was tempting, really tempting. The money, the title, the validation of being right, all of it was appealing, but I'd learned something important over the past 2 weeks. I appreciate that, I said, but I'm not interested in coming back full-time. I'll stay on as a consultant for the next 6 months to help stabilize things and develop a real migration plan. After that, I'm going to look for something else, somewhere that values infrastructure expertise before it becomes a crisis. Donald looked disappointed but not surprised. Can I ask why? Because this company's culture hasn't changed. Stanford's gone, but the board members who backed him are still here. The pressure to move fast and show results is still here. And I don't want to spend the next 5 years fighting the same battles over and over again. I've got a wife and a daughter who deserve a husband and father who's not constantly stressed about preventing the next disaster. Linda spoke up. What would it take to change your mind? Honestly, a fundamental shift in how you value technical expertise. When I raised concerns 6 months ago, I got labeled as resistant to change. When the system failed exactly the way I predicted, suddenly I'm the hero. That's backward. You should listen to your technical people before the crisis, not after. Gregory, to his credit, looked embarrassed. You're right. I apologize for what I said in the previous meeting. I was wrong. I appreciate that, I said. But it's not about one comment. It's about a pattern, and I don't think that pattern's going to change fast enough for me to want to stick around. Donald accepted my terms. I spent the next 6 months at Pinnacle as a consultant, working 3 days a week, billing $200 an hour. I rebuilt the infrastructure documentation. I hired Kyle as the new senior infrastructure architect. He'd earned it. I promoted Vanessa to lead the database team. I established a technical review process that required sign-off from at least 2 senior engineers before any major changes. The SEC investigation resulted in a $12 million fine and a consent decree requiring regular compliance audits. 15 of the lawsuits settled for a combined $23 million. The stock price eventually recovered, but it took about 9 months. As for me, I ended up joining a smaller fintech startup called Clearwater Financial. The CTO, a woman named Rachel Torres, had actually written database management systems before becoming an executive. When I interviewed, she spent 2 hours asking me detailed technical questions about disaster recovery and high-availability architecture. It was the first interview I'd ever had where the person across the table actually understood what I was talking about. The company culture was different, too. When I raised concerns about a proposed feature that would have created security vulnerabilities, Rachel didn't dismiss me. She scheduled a design review, we worked through the issues, and we launched a better, safer version 3 weeks later than originally planned. Nobody called it resistance to change. They called it good engineering. The pay was actually better than Pinnacle had offered. The work-life balance was significantly better. I made it to Sophie's 7th birthday party, her soccer games, her school recitals. Claire stopped finding me at 3 a.m., staring at monitoring dashboards. About a year after I left Pinnacle, Kyle called me. Thought you'd want to know, Donald announced his retirement. The board's bringing in a new CEO, someone from the outside with actual technology experience. Too late for me, but good for them, I guess. Yeah, hey, we miss you around here. Things are better since you set up the new processes, but it's not the same. You're doing great, Kyle. You don't need me. Maybe not, but it would have been nice to have you around anyway. I appreciated that. About 6 months after that, I got a LinkedIn message from Stanford. Hey, Adam, I know we didn't end on great terms, but I wanted to reach out. I've been doing some consulting work, helping companies with technology strategy. Your warnings about the Pinnacle migration have stuck with me. I've been much more cautious in my recommendations, and I always make sure to bring in infrastructure experts early. I guess I'm saying thank you for the lesson, even though I learned it the hard way. I stared at that message for a while before responding. I appreciate you reaching out. Good luck with the consulting work. Just remember that the people who actually run the systems usually know more than the people trying to change them. Lesson learned, thanks. Sophie's 9 now. She still tells people her dad fixes computers, though she's starting to understand that it's a bit more complicated than that. Last week, she asked me what I do at work. I make sure people's money is safe, I told her. Like a superhero. More like a really careful plumber. Not as exciting, but pretty important. She seemed satisfied with that answer. Claire and I were talking the other night about the whole Pinnacle situation. Do you ever regret how it went down? She asked. Sometimes, I admitted. I wonder if I could have handled it differently, been more diplomatic, found a way to make Stanford listen without it turning into a confrontation. And then I remember that I tried that for 6 months. I documented everything. I raised concerns in every possible way. At some point, you can't save people from themselves. You can only decide whether you're going to let them take you down with them. No regrets then. Well, I regret that it took a 20% stock drop and a near-catastrophic system failure for anyone to listen. But do I regret walking away? No, best decision I made. Every time I hear about some company having a major outage because they rushed a cloud migration, or ignored their senior engineers' warnings, or treated infrastructure like it was disposable, I think about that moment in Stanford's office. Him scoffing at me, "You just manage code, not people." He was half right. I managed the code, but the code managed the money, and the money affected people's lives, retirement accounts, college savings, emergency funds, real people's futures running through systems that most of them never thought about until those systems failed. That's something you can't learn from a certification exam or a consulting playbook. You learn it by caring enough about the work to walk away when nobody else will listen. By understanding that sometimes the most important thing you can do is hand over your badge and let someone else learn the hard way. Though I'll admit, watching that stock price drop 20% in an hour was pretty satisfying. Not that I'm petty or anything. Okay, maybe a little petty, but I earned it.